Munoz, like so many of these games are lost in the 6th and 7th inning, or when you're winning 1-run games, it's like when you have let's say you're down a run going into the 7th or 8th. It's about keeping it at 1 run so it gives you a chance to come back. I think a lot of times last year we saw a lot of inherited runners score. Like it's one thing to look at their ERA or whatever if they didn't allow an earned run, but if the inherited runner that they had, somebody else goes on somebody else's ERA, it still scores. Like Trent Thornton, it's kind of crazy. You look at his stuff, when you look at kind of how he does it, it should be better than maybe the numbers show, but for whatever reason in leverage situations, he gives up contact. He has the bad walk. Maybe it's just not like where he fits. Maybe he's more of that 6th or 7th inning guy coming after the starter. I think Scott Service used to label it the pivot guy. But you remember guys like Justin Topa and guys like that would pitch in that role and then, kind of grow from there. So I didn't even know, they called it the second rider pile last year, second rider bucket, but like the pile of relievers that they bring in, I don't know if there's anyone that's like, I'm picking them. Like there's to be that guy that emerges. I mean, the one name, not Neftali Feliz, who's like 107 years old and hasn't pitched in like 3 years, is back. But Shintaro Fujinama, he's a Japanese pitcher. If you recall, he was the guy with the A's for a while. He threw like 97 and had no idea where it was going. He hit like 3 Mariners players in one
I don't
game.
remember him at all. No.
Oh man, he throws like 97 and it's got nasty movement and everything. But literally, like any other Japanese pitcher that can really command, this guy is like Wild Thing Vaughn, just spraying.
Perfect. He's our guy.
But I mean, like, if there is somehow they can harness that, if the Mariners, if their pitching lab can kind of get him some command, then maybe that's the case. The one thing is too is like it's inefficiencies or whatever that's kind of what everybody thinks. It's the lab fixes their mechanics or a pitch or something. A lot of times, what their pitching guys do is just look at the success rate of certain pitches and certain aspects and say, look, just throw this 25 or 30% more, throw it in these counts, you'll have more success. So maybe one of these guys that they've picked up on waivers, they're looking at and saying, hey, you need to do this. If you do this, you'll have more success.
What about a couple of guys? I mean, and the thing that they've done, and we've discussed this before, they have this amazing ability to find guys that we don't know anything about, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, that guy was really good. I mean, this has been, of all the criticism of this front office, one thing that they have done well is with their bullpen. They have been able to find guys, and with their pitching lab and all of their expertise in that department, they've found guys and been able to develop them and have been able to at least always squeeze out a year or two from these guys, and then they'll pivot to the next person. But as Jude pointed out in his story, I mean, that ERA last year for this bullpen, the highest since they've had since 2001. Most home runs per 9 innings in the last 5 years. And then from August 1st, and everyone could see this, I mean, where they tired down, and their bullpen was like 29th out of 30th. In Major League Baseball, just as they kind of wore down. So they're going to need these guys, the guys that have been injured, to come back and hopefully be as good as they once were, and then have some surprise guys in that bullpen. I'm curious about some of the guys that we should keep an eye on, who are right now are in the minors, who are coming up, who they once were starters, now they're going to try and put in the bullpen. Who are some of the guys that Mariner fans, as we get into spring training, start reading all of your work and Jude's work, when the games start on the Game Changer webcast, who should they be looking at out of that bullpen? Starters who they're going to try to convert into bullpen arms.
Well, I mean, I know Adam listed Brandon Garcia as a potential candidate. I mean, he's lefty, throws hard, and he's considered one of their more ready starting pitching prospects. And he was pretty coveted last year at the trade deadline. Lots of teams asked about him. I think what they'll do, he'll stretch out as a starter. As far as I know, he's going to stretch out as a starter during spring training. But like if he pitches well in that role, and maybe they look at, maybe Taylor Saucedo or Gabe Spire not pitching as well this spring, they may turn to Garcia and have him pitch in the bullpen for a little bit. I mean, like, I don't think that he's going to be a full-time conversion to reliever. You don't usually do that with somebody that young, but
he's a big kid, 6'4". Jesus.
Yeah. he throws well, and so like that's a scenario where they could do that because they have Logan Evans and Emerson Hancock down at AAA as starters. They tried to convert Logan Evans last year as a reliever, and it just didn't work for him. Didn't bounce back maybe as they wanted, and so I don't know. I mean, those are kind of the main guys. I was looking at the non-roster invites. I don't really know a lot of these guys.
What about that Hunter Cranton?
Oh, so he was drafted as a reliever. He was a reliever at Illinois, and so I mean, he is. I mean, like they honestly thought last year that he was so advanced, and because he was a reliever and because he was built up, like they thought maybe he could even push his way into something last year just because he was that advanced. So I'll be interested to see kind of where he's at, but he's a guy that is a reliever, has experience, and I think they believe he could probably come in. There's another guy named, I think it's Daris Valdez. He was a guy that they picked up from the Phillies. Guy throws like 100. Again, doesn't necessarily know where it's going, but you know, that's kind of that happens with some guys. They have some guys like that. You know, it's the same thing with Carlos Vargas, who they got in the Suarez trade. The last remaining remnants of the Suarez trade. You know, he throws hard, but he just doesn't throw enough strikes. I mean, the selling point for these guys will be, do they throw enough strikes to make it? Because they're not. I mean, this pitching lab and, you know, the Dan Wilson in general, they're just not going to put up with walks from relievers. That's just not what they want.
Hey, what do you know, when the MLB.com did that story, Divish, about, you know, the home road splits with the offense and the numbers are so vastly different and all that. One of the things that stood out to a lot of people were the and you didn't need that story to point it out, but it just did. The home road splits of Munoz. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, it's pretty drastic, the difference between what he does at home compared to what he does on the road last year. At home, he had a 0.28 ERA. On the road, it was a 4.28. What factors go into that for him? Why did it affect him more than it affected other pitchers?
I didn't look at it like closely enough to sit there and say, but situationally, you know, when you're at home, it's a little different because you're coming in and, you know, you're coming like they're not using Munoz very often unless they have a lead at home or it's tied. You know, where on the road, like you can pitch Munoz if you're down one or something like that. And I'm not a big believer in the mentality of the save, non-save situation thing. I think that's overblown. I just think that some of the times they used them on the road were situations where it could balloon up more. Whereas like when they used them at home, it was a pretty set situation for him to have success. So and like he did give up some homers on the road. There were a couple. I can't remember, it was one in Milwaukee maybe or something like that. He had a blow up there, and that was when his back was an issue. But like, no, I don't make a ton of that. I mean, maybe the contact is a little harder. You know, you do get punished a little bit more. But I think for him, usually it's a command issue. When he doesn't command, he might walk a guy or two or fall behind, and that's when he gets hit. And he puts himself in more predictable situations. But I didn't think that there was any one thing that was that drastic. Whereas like with a starter where you have that many more innings, you know, like with Brian Wu and Bryce Miller, I do feel like, and even George Kirby and these guys, I do feel like when they're at home, they feel, and I'm sure in Munoz's mind too, you feel like you can challenge guys more because you won't get punished. And so, you know, and you don't. And then whereas on the road, you might try to be a little more fine with your command, and that you have a miss here, or you miss there, and all of a sudden you're 2-0 or 3-1, and it doesn't matter where you're pitching at. You can give up damage that way. So I think there is that mentality or freedom of pitching at home, but I think it's more indicative for starters than it is for relievers.
In your latest preview up at SeattleTimes.com, you looked at the starting rotation, the headline being, can the M starting rotation stay elite in 2025? I'll ask you the question your editor posted there on the headline. Can they stay elite in 2025?
If they can stay healthy, they can stay elite. That's the separator. I mean, they used 7 starting pitchers last year. That just doesn't happen. I mean, 5 of them made, like 140 some of the 162 starts. Emerson Hancock made 12 starts. I mean, they used 6 pitchers because Jonathan Diaz,
he pitched 1, right?
Pitched 1. And so, yeah, it's like, okay, well,
That's amazing.
I mean, does that, and if you look at the overall usage, Logan Gilbert's over 200 innings. George Kirby's back-to-back seasons with 190 innings pitched. Bryce Miller bumped up his overall usage by 50 innings. Brian Wu up by 35 innings. Does that, portend to injuries like fatigue injuries, usage injuries? Do we see a stint where somebody gets a soggy shoulder or something like that? You don't know.
And that's soggy shoulder.
But that's the thing is like, and really the Mariners are in a position where they can withstand an injury for a little while. Like Emerson Hancock is a solid pitcher. He's not on the level of any of those five right now. And Logan Evans has the potential to be, but he's never pitched. So, you lose one of those guys for a month, or you lose a guy, you have two of them out at the same time. That's a problem, because this offense we don't know, but as of now, isn't good enough to withstand maybe that sort of absence. So that's the thing. If they can keep them healthy, and like the Mariners do a really good job with keeping pitchers healthy and like all their arm care, and Logan Gilbert does all this training to avoid injury. But at the same time, throwing a baseball is an unnatural act, and at some point, it takes its toll, the amount of pitches. So, it's crazy. They used 7 starters last year, and those 7 starters logged more innings as a rotation than any other staff in baseball. That's 94 quality starts. In an era where pitchers usually go 5 and dive, and very few pitchers, get to that 200 innings threshold. Logan Gilbert got there. George Kirby was 10 or I think 7 away. Bryce Miller's at 180. Luis Castillo would have been close to 100 if he didn't have the 200 if he didn't have the hamstring strain. I think that's the issue. And like Brian Wu has had a history of having nagging things come up for him. They think that changing his routines in between starts will be more beneficial to keeping him on the field. But you just don't know. Like, that's the thing is, like, I think there's always that uneasiness with pitchers. Like, when is it going to happen to them? Because it's rare that it doesn't.
I'm sure you're going to catch up with Brian Wu. That's something I wanted to ask you. Obviously being down there in spring training to get a vibe about, how his offseason was. What is he doing differently? Because that will be one of the bigger question marks is, can he stay healthy? Can he have a full season where he provides just, every 5th day, just a great turn of the rotation? I mean, he had a fabulous season last year. I mean, 121 plus innings. He went 9-3 at ERA of 2.89. But again, and it seemed like he maybe got through a little bit of that nagging stuff. But again, it took him in the beginning of the season to kind of get over that hump. And I think there was a famous talk. Was it Cal that gave him the talk in Boston? I think when you and I talked last
Cal
season. Yeah. Kind of a coming to Jesus moment with him.
Yeah. Just kind of about who you are and how do you want to, like what are the expectations or what do you need to do to get to the next level that Bryce and those other guys did. I mean, like, that's the thing. If they were able to get, if you can get a combined, so let's say that Gilbert, Kirby, and Castillo give you 30 starts as your 1, 2, and 3, like 30 starts roughly, and you get 25 minimum from Bryce and Brian, so that's 140 starts. You get 140 starts from those guys, that's pretty solid. You'll be happy with that. If you get anything more than 140 starts from those 5 guys combined, they'll have success just because those guys are that good. I just like those guys continue, and this is what I wrote about. It's like the X factor in all of this. These guys and their continuous search to improve and their willingness to adjust grips, to change their thinking on pitches, to modify stuff throughout the season and continually adapt to what hitters are doing is what separates them. I mean, like, there's a lot of guys that throw hard and can throw a lot of pitches, but the mentality that these guys have to kind of continually adjust who they are as a pitcher is what makes them great. And I think that's what could separate them. If they get, like I said, the 150 starts from those guys, or 145 starts from those 5 guys, they'll win 85 games minimum because that's what happened last year.
Yeah.
And we won't. And as little as they did this offseason, I don't think the offense will be as bad as it was last year.
Well, you know, the one thing that you love about those five guys in particular, and you kind of touched on it there a little bit, is that they have this drive and this desire not to be complacent, to always try. And I mean, I know a lot of athletes are like this, but this group in particular, like they're always looking for the next. How can we get better? What can we do to improve on our pitching arsenal, which is already great anyways, but how do we get better? That's something that's just that you hear those guys talk to you guys that you love to hear all the time. Just never being complacent to the stuff that they already have and the desire to learn and develop more.
Yeah, I mean, like it's
the anti-us.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just it's a craft, pitching is a craft, and they're continuing to hone their craft and be better. I mean, like you saw Bryce Miller posting videos of him throwing a cutter at 90 miles an hour, and just that boring in action on the hands, like, what that could do for him against lefties as well as righties, like just another weapon. I mean, like I had a scout for, I don't know, it was must have been the Rays or somebody asked me, he's like, does every one of the Mariners pitchers throw like 7 different pitches and all like can perform? I was like, well, they don't continue to stop. They don't look at it and just say, these are my 4 pitches, I'm not going to do anything different. Like that mentality. And I think at this point too, with technology and the way you can measure it and everything else, like you can see if a pitch is viable through the data, like the TrackMan software and stuff. How much is it moving? How much is the spinning? Is it really viable based on metrics for other pitchers' success? It's not just a catcher telling you, oh man, that looks great. No, like you have real input as to whether a pitch will be useful or not. And these guys have all grown up around it, and they're continually using it to improve themselves. And I think, the Mariners for a while had the market inefficiency because they were really good at that. But you saw like the Royals got a pitching guy last year that helped change some stuff. Everybody's starting to get these guys. Hell, you look at these college teams and their pitching labs, they got like 4 coaches and all these analysts and all these different things. So that's what everybody does. But the Mariners, you can have the best pitching lab in the world and all this stuff, but if you don't have players that don't embrace like change and different thinking and getting out of their comfort zone to have success, then it won't work, And now that's the thing, is like, how do you get hitters to do that? Because it's so different for pitchers, because you have these standards and stuff set based on like the data and like the efficiency with your mechanics. But with hitters, it's still so different.